Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Darko.Audio podcast. This is obviously going out on YouTube. It's also going out in audio format. And once again, I'm joined by Srajan Ebaen from 6 Moons. And we're talking about some news items that have come up in the last, 6 weeks since we last did a podcast. Now, I have a bit of a grizzle about Record Store Day, but not for the reasons you might think. Srajan has uncovered a DAC that he thinks competes with products 2 or 3 times the price. But instead of just filling the room with that kind of hot air, he qualifies his statement by naming the other products, right? Which I think is really important. Also in this episode, I talk about Plexamp. And yeah, this was a very chaotic episode to record because, we're using new software. I had some noise issues outside. Also, you can hear some, I hate to say this, I'm sorry about this. You can hear my voice bleed through Srajan's headphones because he's got some new fancy RAL headphones. He wanted to wear them for the podcast. I didn't know, but they bleed out and then into his microphone. So you can hear a little bit of the fold back of the sound, which isn't ideal. So please forgive us that. I promise you this episode is worth watching. There's a lot of, I think, good stuff, good information in there. So let's get started.
This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest, makers of the mythical series Analog Interconnects. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
Well, Srajan, welcome back to another episode of the Darko.Audio podcast. We're using new software, aren't we? So things could get a bit chaotic. But I'm going to kick us off today with a question to you.
Okay.
Today, Srajan, is the 20th of April. It's a Saturday. Do you know what day it is in terms of hi-fi and music today?
I'm drawing a complete and utter blank.
Yeah, because you don't do this format, but I thought you might know about it. So today is Record Store Day.
Okay.
So that's where a whole bunch of independent record stores get exclusive stock that they can punt out during the day. And I think it started about 15, maybe almost 20 years ago to try and boost independent record stores.
Is that a global phenomenon?
Yes. But it's become big business. Now, the big driver behind it, and I'm going to introduce this term because I'm going to come back to this in future episodes. The big driver behind people wanting to buy Record Store Day releases is FOMO. So you know what FOMO means, right? Fear of missing out. Right. So it's limited editions, it's unusual pressings, it's repressings, it's like never before on vinyl or first time on vinyl in like 30 years, or here's a bunch of tracks that we put on the end of a CD compilation 15 years ago and they're now on vinyl, or there's colour pressing, picture discs, things like that. And I try and resist it every year. I tried not to do it this year. I promise you I tried. I skipped out on it last year because I was in Portugal. So I wasn't really in the mood or in the proximity of a record store for me to go. But this year, because I'm in the centre of Berlin and I'm just behind Friedrichstrasse. Now, normally on a Saturday morning at 10 to 9, it's a ghost town. It's like the first 10 minutes of the zombie movie 28 Days Later. So I thought, I'm going out for a coffee. I'll just walk up to Dussmann. So Dussmann is this big independent bookstore, but it's also, I think, the city's biggest independent record and CD store. But it's kind of got that sort of stuffy, I guess in German we would say spießig kind of vibe to it. I mean, this whole area has, I guess you call it bourgeois, is one way of looking at it. Very middle class, very well to do. So I walked up to Dussmann this morning thinking, I'll just poke my head in, and if it's not too busy, I'll try and grab a few items, because there are a few records that I wanted to get this year, because they publish a list before the day comes around of like what's going to be made available, but it's all first come, first serve. There's no holds, there's no internet ordering, not until Monday morning where the leftovers get put on the net. So I thought I'll just pop in. And the last time I'd been into Dussmann on a record store day was 2019, before the pandemic, because obviously last year I wasn't here. And I got to say, things have changed a lot in the last 4 or 5 years when it comes to record store day, and I was not expecting it, because I walked into Dussmann, turned left, And the vinyl collection actually is in the very far corner behind a partition. But they'd obviously put all the record store day stock out in the sort of book areas as well. It was a zoo. It was absolutely... It was horrendous. There must have been like 250 people in an area where there would normally only be 20 in an average day, right? So I did take a photo. I am going to share this photo if I can do this properly. I apologise now to people who are listening to this episode and obviously don't get the visuals. It's actually a pretty shitty photo, but it gave me the opportunity to have a bit of an old man yells at cloud grumpy moment, like, oh, this is terrible. It's not the joy of vinyl. This is a scrum. And it really was. But the interesting thing is it wasn't just dudes like me, middle-aged dudes shuffling along, sort of, it's always been a bit tight and we kind of get into the racks and nobody really says very much. It was busy in there and it was full of lots of young people, especially females, buying Taylor Swift records, which on one hand is great, isn't it? Like it's a different generation rather than just like old duffers like you or I buying this stuff. I know you don't, but we're of the same sort of era. But it was not like it was even 4 or 5 years ago. And actually,
in terms of attendance, you mean it's up?
Yeah, attendance is way up. I mean, I was there in 2019, maybe a bit later, and it was a bit cozy. There was probably like 40 people there, 30 people there. You know, all the racks were populated by people flicking through them, but this was just people everywhere. Almost like, I think it had the vibe of a Black Friday sale.
So we could say that vinyl, in that sense, has gone from like insider or niche much more back into like mainstream, right?
It's kind of one of those things where it's both obscure and mainstream, because I think the average man in the street will be like, what, vinyl's back? Nobody told me. And it's still very much, I won't say it's the least popular physical format because we covered this last time because that's the cassette. But CDs still outsell vinyl, something like 2 to 1. In some countries, 3 to 1, apart from in the USA. In the USA, more consumers are buying records now than they are buying CDs. But in Europe, CDs are still very much king of the hill. That's my preference, actually. I mean, I guess at the moment, I'm just super into CDs, but I thought I'll try and swing myself in the other direction, go and buy some records and play those. But I refuse to engage in the scrum, in the fisticuffs, in the kind of the competitiveness of it. And it's because of FOMO, right? So I've messaged a bunch of friends like, hey, if you see this, can you get this for me? And a DJ mate on the other side of the city is like, I'm going to this store, are you coming over? I'm like, no way, I'm not going over there. So it's just, I was shocked. And yeah, my friend Lena, who commented under my Instagram post, going, well, what did you expect at Dustman in the middle of Mitter on a Saturday morning? But like, it's a very mum thing to say, isn't it? Because obviously, if I didn't expect that, otherwise I wouldn't have gone. So clearly my expectations were not aligned with reality. And now I know how much of a thing this has become, even since, before the pandemic. It just seems to be huge and, more mainstream, which is good. I do worry about the pricing on it because I'm sure if you speak to any vinyl enthusiast, the first thing they'll grumble about is the pricing on record store day releases, because it is like 15-20% higher than your average sort of release. But because they're limited, people, it's basically just below what people are prepared to pay. Otherwise, they wouldn't price them that way because nobody would buy them.
Can I ask an ignorant question?
Please do.
How is this record day promoted? How do people that are not currently already into vinyl find out about it?
I guess
it's just become an institution?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually in April every year. I think it's usually the third Saturday in April, something like that. Mm-hmm. During the pandemic, they did like a few sort of what were called drops in June and July, but they had to be more tightly orchestrated by the stores so that people weren't mixing as they were today. Because the other thing that I took up a mask with me because I knew that it was going to be, if it was a bit busy, I'd probably put a mask on because I'm not going to get any kind of infectious disease just for the sake of buying a few records. You know, it doesn't really matter what it is. I don't want the flu. So, I guess it gets, I think a lot of it comes through social media.
Okay.
And then a lot of artists who release, obviously, their music on vinyl, they're all promoting it, especially if they have a release coming out on Record Store Day, because a lot of them do exclusives. So I don't begrudge. I mean, people talk about, it's just become all novelty items and picture discs and things like that. I don't mind that. I think if people like picture discs or they like coloured vinyl, then the record industry is just satisfying demand.
I mean, if it's once a year, it's like going to the zoo. It's a special occasion.
It really was
Right.
like this.
You
very
pay extra
zoo-like.
for the ticket, and you know there's going to be lots of people there.
Yeah. So normally the stuff I miss, I tend to be able to pick up online at some point in the following year. Last year there was only one thing I wanted. This year's like 10 things.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to. There's the first EP by a band called Prefab Sprout came out initially on vinyl in '83. It hasn't been reissued since, and they're repressing it this year for the first time in 40 years.
Okay.
So when I came home in a massive grump earlier on, I sat down, I went onto Discogs, and I bought myself pretty much a mint copy of the original pressing of that EP, because it doesn't exist on streaming and it's not on CD. Most of the stuff is on streaming, it's on CD. Some of it's on another form of vinyl. I'm very pleased that it exists, and anybody who says, "Oh, it's become too commercial or mainstream," I just think, well, just don't go. You know, like, I mean, I know I'm having a bit of a grizzle about the number of people, but that's more. I was just so surprised at how big it has become, and a lot of record stores manage a queue down the street because their internal real estate inside the store is small, so they can only probably accommodate 10 customers at a time.
Right.
Whereas Dussmann is this enormous multi-level bookstore, so everyone can pile in and mill about, and even though it's busy, they don't really have to do too much in the way of crowd control. And because it is a sort of fancier area of the city, you don't get too many ne'er-do-wells, you know. So yeah, it's just, I just find the whole thing utterly fascinating. But the big takeaway for me was, how many Swifties, Taylor Swift fans were there this year, because she released a new album yesterday. So they were out in force. I guess also because it's so close to Friedrichstrasse Essen-U-Bahn station, it's easy to get to. So maybe it was a day out. But the rest of Friedrichstrasse was dead. Just as normal, just no one around. It's really weird. So anyway.
You know, mentioning Taylor Swift, it's amazing how certain artists, a handful of them, have such an enormous influence over the entire industry.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talk about
Yeah.
YouTube influencers, but now certain artists have become, in a way, influencers in that particular industry or niche.
I think Taylor Swift, although I don't think she'll be remembered as a kind of creative force musically, but I think she is an excellent role model for young girls, and I wouldn't dismiss her out of hand for any of those reasons. I think that's a really good thing, and yeah, I can only see upsides with her. Maybe there is a downside. I don't know if there is. I've not seen it, but again, it's like everything in life. If it's not for me, I just ignore it and watch it go by, you know?
Yeah.
Like I observe what's going on and how people react to it, but I don't have to have my sort of little keyboard tantrum about it. You know, I'm more likely to have as you know, a grizzle about Record Store Day attendees being so numerous. But she is, I think she's great for, well, she's obviously great for the music industry, that's for sure, but she's good. I just think I didn't want to use this word, but I will, but she's wholesome. You know, there's nothing kind of edgy or dark, or she's very parent friendly. So if you've got like a 9-year-old girl, then you'd want her to be into Taylor Swift. Mm-hmm. And, you know, she writes catchy songs, I guess, you know. So, yeah, I don't know. It's the Swift phenomenon. I guess lots of these kids are buying records and maybe they're playing them, maybe they're not. But, you know, audiophiles who grumble that, 20% of vinyl or 50% of vinyl, whatever it is, that is bought is never played. This is outrageous. It's like, people could do with their records what they want. If they want to buy them, take them home, look at it for 20 minutes, and then put it on the shelf and never look at it again. That's entirely up to them. This is sort of attitude of like, you must do what I do. People
I remember a customer in Santa Rosa, California, who was a little odd, and he had bought lots of records, right?
Right.
And then he had advanced his hearing, he said, to the point where he would glue all the records onto the wall. He sold all of his hardware, and now he was enjoying listening to his records, just looking at them. I kid you not.
Was this in New Mexico? you say Santa
No,
Rosa?
this was in California.
California, yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, California's full of very interesting people. I don't know. All right, let's move on to something from you, Srajan.
I am very excited about a brand new brand.
Okay.
To introduce it, I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
Now, if I say Singapore and I say Windshine Audio, what pops into your mind?
Denafrips.
Okay.
Because Windshine is the global distributor for Denafrips. And I guess a couple of other brands. Kinky Studio.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the others because I've not...
Jay's Audio.
Does he do Jay's?
Yes.
Is he still doing Jay's?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
That has spun off into another venture called Beat Technic,
Okay.
also out of Singapore. And the gentleman who runs that is a very, very close associate of Alvin Chi at Windshine and actually worked for him previously.
Okay.
Now, why is the Denafrips connection interesting? What has Denafrips done, or I should say, what have Windshine Audio done for Denafrips on behalf of Chi-Fi?
This is a question to me, right? Okay. I would say they have provided an interface to the Western customer. So maybe if you're a Chinese manufacturer, maybe you don't speak English. No shame in that. I don't speak Chinese. Maybe you don't understand the Western market as well as somebody else might, say in Singapore, for example. So if you have somebody there as a bod who's already in the West but still in Asia, they might be in a good position to deal with inquiries, warranty issues, and just general sort of stock supply and distribution. So, yeah.
That's exactly what I was aiming at, in that Chi-Fi originally was nearly derogatory, like sort of low or mid-fi, in that it was cheap and cheerful stuff from China, very often imported directly or bought through platforms like Yoshida, Alibaba, even Amazon. And just yesterday, I was listening to a YouTube video by Windshine Audio talking about grey market.
Oh,
and
I
how
watched
that
that
is
as
a
well.
really, really big problem
Yes.
with Chinese companies.
Right.
Okay, so now I'm going to transition into the new brand.
Okay.
And for those people that are not watching, I'm going to show John.
That's a very blingy Chinese remote control. So it's like a aluminium or aluminum billet with sort of gold-coloured or maybe brass sort of inset buttons on it. I guess if you shake it, do they rattle?
No,
Okay.
no rattling. But
That's it.
if I
That's
may
super
point
bling.
out these two buttons here.
They say, is it function 1 and function 2?
Exactly, they are assignable.
Okay.
Wherein lies the tale.
Okay. Of course.
So the first new product that this brand has come out with is a triple meow product. It has 3 catnips that you like to talk about.
3 slices of
3
audiophile
audiophile
catnip.
catnips. It has discrete R2R.
Okay, that's definitely catnip, yeah.
It has I2S,
Also
configurable,
Very catnippy, yes.
and it has NOS mode. And we're going to break all of that down.
Okay.
And before we continue, I should say that the name of the company, if you look at the bottom,
Yep, it says LAiV. So I guess that's pronounced live.
exactly, and for the reason you would suspect, live, like live music or live audio.
Okay.
And why I made the connection to Windshine Audio is that when I was working with Denafrips and Kinky, one of my go-betweens was a gentleman by the name of Wang Fai Ho. He was like a lieutenant of Alvin Chi, you might say. And a couple of months ago, I get an email from him announcing that he was now leading a new brand called LAiV Audio, and would I be interested to review their very first product, the LAiV Audio Harmony DAC. And now I'm going to attempt to screen share.
Okay.
And let's go.
Take your time. There's no There's no hurry, Srajan. I guess anybody listening to this will be like, "What's happening now?" But you're sharing an article from 6 Moons that says
actually not an article. I dumped all the pictures I want to show into like one page on my website, so I can figure out how to do this.
Okay, so
we're looking at a half-width machine, about 1 rack space tall, available in silver or black. Looked at from the front, the left top corner is sort of like lopped off to give like a facet. And there we have a power button. Then we have a display. And then on the right side, we have a menu input selector knob. But rather than a standard knob facing us, it's more like you throw a coin on the desk. And so you see the narrow side of the coin. And in order to see the top, you would have to look at the top of the component. So that sort of wheel is set in, and it mirrors what Bakun did for the original AMP 11R.
Oh yeah, it does.
And it mirrors what Lindemann is doing with their music book range. Yes. They also have this kind of volume or menu access button. The whole affair sits on 3 pointy golden footers. And then if we look at the back, we see XLR and RCA outputs. We see the expected toslink, USB, and coaxial input. And then we get to I2S on HDMI.
Before you go there, have we said that this is a DAC yet? Because it is a DAC, right?
Yes. I believe I called it the LAiV Audio Harmony DAC. If I did not, I stand corrected.
No, but maybe I tuned out. But let's just, we need to make sure that everyone understands it's digital in, analog out, it's a DAC. Yeah, okay, sorry, Srajan, as you were.
So this next picture shows that rather than branding this piece as per usual, where you would expect a silk screen or an engraving on the front panel, they're more discreet. They put the name on the top cover. And it's engraved very, very deeply. And it doesn't even say audio. It just says LAiV on the top. Yeah, and we see like 3 little sort of golden insets. That's for when you stack the components on top of each other. So those now become spike receivers.
Gotcha.
And then we see an inside shot of 2 very high quality Christec clocks. Very often they're called femto clocks, which just means like high precision, low jitter clocks.
I would also add that femto clocking, Srajan, is another piece of audiophile catnip.
Oh, meow! We have 4.
4! Crazy.
Okay, so this next image shows another inside shot, and it shows the R2R discrete resistor ladders ensconced in sort of aluminum slivers that are anodized copper gold and that are sitting upright. So it reduces the amount of footprint that those circuit boards are taking. So the whole component can be narrower because these normally wider things are now standing upright.
Sure, but it's extremely blingy, isn't it? I mean...
It is extremely blingy and extremely well built for something that the average consumer will never see. You have to crack into the case to see this.
Yeah.
This next image shows that the casework is basically milled from solid. So we have different chambers and we have an indentation for the transformer. And it's also a modular design made for easy repairs. So the different circuit parts are all separate. And so you don't have to replace one motherboard should something go wrong. You just replace the output stage, the IV stage, the digital input stage, what have you.
It kind of reminds me of, you mentioned them before, but the Bakun amp inside was a bit like that with the kind of cutouts for each section of the circuit.
So another very interesting point of distinction, especially for a new brand, is that I know very few, if any, manufacturers who offer both silver and black and then have a remote control in each finish. Usually there's one remote control. It might be black, it might be silver, and if you end up buying the black component, you have a silver remote control or vice versa. Here, they offer something that is matched. This next image is showing the inside. Again, from the top down, super clean. The next image shows I2S configurations. This machine embeds 8 different pin configurations, and unlike Denafrips, who access their pin configurations with like buttons on the front that you have to push in a particular sequence, and then you have to watch certain lights go on and off in a particular sequence, or somebody else does it with dip switches. LAiV do it in the menu. It's super simple. There's 8 different settings, and this page of the owner's manual shows you what the pin configuration is for the 8 most popular modes. Now there still is a chance that you may end up owning a transport or a server streamer that has I2S out over HDMI, and you think, I got 2 HDMI ports, I'm in business, and no, you're not. You may still find a source that has a pin configuration that LAiV audio doesn't account for. So now you would be using USB or Toslink or RCA.
But this has come about because there's no industry standard for I2S to over HDMI, and so different manufacturers are using different pinout configurations.
It doesn't even have to be over HDMI. Other ones are using RJ45,
right?
Or they're using multiple BNCs. Originally, there was even S-video. And in fact, I2S was never even intended for external signal propagation. It was for inside a DAC. This next image just very quickly again shows that we have silver and black remotes. And now we see another clever feature, which is that, first of all, the display is big enough where I can read it from 4 meters away in the chair. I'm now 62. My eyes are not what they used to be. And I can still see it without glasses.
Right.
So that's brilliant. That's a useful feature because Denafrips have no display at all. And their sort of informational LEDs are pinprick tiny. I can't even see them. And then another DAC that I have, which I'll show in a moment, is the Sen Grand. And their flagship DAC has a display, but the contrast is so poor that from the seat during the day, I can't make it out. And here we see that we are receiving a 192 kilohertz PCM input signal that is upsampled to 768 kilohertz. So not only do we see the incoming sample rate, we see the outgoing sample rate. And why is the incoming sample rate nice to have? Because certain software will resample without us knowing it. We think they're playing 44.1 kilohertz and it's doing 48. Well, this machine will actually tell you. And obviously this upsampling is only active if you select oversampling mode. If you select NOS mode, and I'll explain in a moment what that means, then there's no oversampling. And when originally we talked about audiophile catnip, NOS is one of them. It can stand for new old stock. And then it applies to primarily tubes, but it can also mean transistors. For example, SAEQ in Serbia bought off remaining stock of germanium transistors, not silicone. Leslaw's Audio just bought up stock of parts that were made for the military that are no longer made, that are super high spec parts. They bought off the entire remaining inventory, enough to build 50 monoblocks with, and then retain parts for repairs. And NOS can even mean cables. Sergei Timachev of Stealth Audio found Russian military surplus cable of amorphous conductors. And they were so good that then Siltec tried to find their own amorphous cables, went to Israel to a military defense contractor, and it ended up that either the price was too high or that contractor wasn't interested in the low volume that an audio cable manufacturer would order. So NOS can stand for new old stock, or in our case today, non-oversampling. Now the next image shows incoming signal native 128 DSD.
Wow.
And since I already mentioned that this is an R2R DAC, thinking listeners and viewers will immediately say, well, wait a minute, a multi-bit DAC can't possibly convert 1-bit DSD without first converting it to some form of PCM. And yes, anything that is 64 or 128 or even 256 DSD will be converted to PCM. So here, DSD is more a convenience feature. It's, you can't play back native DSD, it will be converted to PCM.
I guess
another point of interest is that LAiV Audio as a new brand already has on their roadmap 4 more models. And the first one in the left-hand corner where I'm pointing my mouse cursor there.
Which listeners cannot see, but...
Cannot see. In the same type chassis, we'll have a streamer with a display. Then in the same side chassis, in the upper right-hand corner, we'll have a preamp/headphone amplifier. And now the wheel on the right side will obviously be a volume control, and we'll again have a remote. In the lower left-hand corner, we have a pair of monoblocks, and they will be GaN-fed monos. In other words, that indicates Class D, even though I haven't confirmed that. And in the right lower-hand corner, we have an outboard power supply intended for the DAC to give it more power.
So they've gone for the full system.
Not out yet, but the roadmap, I believe, accounts for the first new model to come in the 3rd or 4th quarter of this year, and then for the monoblocks to pop up probably first quarter of 2025.
Okay.
The next image shows USB input, oversampling engaged, and DSD64 natively incoming. DSD will not upsample, even in oversampling mode, because it's not a 1-bit converter. Here we see the display showing an incoming 176.4 PCM signal that is being upsampled to 705.6. And of all the little icons in the top of the display, the right one shows that now we also have the SEN clock, the I2S clock engaged rather than the internal clock. That's another feature, another option that we have here. We can also invert phase.
Right.
And here now what I said before, here is my SEN Grand DAC with its display, which is yellow on black. And by the time we're looking at 3 or 4 meter distance from me, I can no longer see it. And finally,
we have 8.
We have 8 out of 9 of the key personnel, and the third one from the right is Wang Fai Ho, the gentleman that is my contact at the factory.
Okay.
Between each other, these gentlemen plus the ones that are not shown apparently have between 70 to 100 man-years worth of experience in the sector. And a lot of them come from very, very big brands like a Sony or a Pioneer or a Mitsubishi. They have a lot of experience, and I believe it's the tall gentleman here in the middle who is the industrial designer who has worked with Sheraton and Hilton hotels. So he's a very, very high-level industrial designer, which explains why this stack looks so slick. And 2 more images. Here we see the factory, and we see a production run of the first DAC units that we were just talking about.
I have a question.
By all means.
The screen on this LAiV DAC, is it a touch screen?
It is not.
Do you know if the screen on the forthcoming streamer will be a touch screen?
I have no idea. I would suspect not, but that's just my supposition.
Right.
Now, what do we think something like this may cost? Again, we showed the features, we showed the build quality inside and out. We have audiophile catnips.
All over the place. There's loads of them, even upsampling.
Yeah.
It's one big ball of audiophile catnip. I mean, I would say something like this will probably go for $4,000.
Well, that's another reason why I'm so excited, because this will sell, it's already selling for $2,700 US,
Okay.
including shipping excluding VAT. However, they are already working on fulfillment centers in the US and in the EU, whereby they will ship a mass shipment to those centers and then will fulfill orders from within the market. So if you and I living in the EU were to order one of these, once they have that set up, we wouldn't be paying VAT. And we would get the shipment probably delivered within 2 days rather than waiting to it to come from Singapore.
Yeah, so it's painful waiting from Singapore. I mean, especially having to deal with European customs, which, as you and I both know, can be very painful at times.
Yeah, but I got this piece in 3 days from Singapore, so
Wow.
no pain whatsoever.
That's crazy. If anybody ever sends anything to me outside of the EU, the German customs dudes, they come down on it, like they just clamp it down and go, this is not moving until we know what's in it, why it's coming into Europe, who's receiving it, why they're receiving it. It's like having a rectal examination sometimes with those guys.
The reason why I sort of tried to lead in a circuitous way with Windshine Audio is that, again, we have somebody that is very well trained in Western expectations and pre- and post-sales service, instructional YouTube videos. So it is not like ordering from a big web portal and then being left out, hung out to dry if and when something goes wrong and you may have to ship it back. You don't even know whether you get any service. So not only do we have quality product, I also believe we will have the same level of service that we have with Windshine Audio. And the final thing I'll say, and those who want to know more will have to look in the description box below and read my full-length review on 6 Moons, is that when it comes to, well, what does this compete with at $2,700? Well, I have a Denafrips Terminator Plus. I have that 10 grand flagship DAC. I have a Cost Engineering D1, and I have a Sonnet Pasithea DAC from Cees Rutenberg, who also operated Metrum Acoustics.
Yep.
All of those are somewhere between 5 to 6K, up to 9K for the cause. I bought my review unit, loaner,
Oh, okay.
the LAiV DAC, and it has displays what I used before in my big system. And if you want to get an idea why, and I wouldn't say it's better than the others, it's just a different flavor. It's on the level, but it's a very discrete flavor. In our last podcast, we talked about THD.
We did.
And we talked about second order dominant and third order dominant flavors, where one is sort of richer and creamier and the other one is more like a shot of ristretto, just straight out. This is more the third order type flavor. It's super separated, super detailed, but not thin and lean, and it's very lit up. I call it all over. So it's not specific to the treble, it's across the whole bandwidth. And there we have it. LAiV Audio, a new brand from Singapore, designed in Singapore, built in China. That's how they can be successful. Currently selling direct, looking for dealers who won't get a big margin, like Denafrips. And sooner than later, apparently with warehouses in the US and Europe to expedite quick turnarounds on orders.
Is it fair to say that this looks like it could be this year's Denafrips?
I think it's more than fair to say. I think it will all depend on their marketing push and how quickly they sort of penetrate, consumer awareness. Your friend Michael Lavornia already has a black version that he will review for twittering machines. I don't know what's planned after that. But if within the next few months we have 3 or 4 or 5 reviews hitting, including possibly YouTube reviews, and if then they can ship, rather than selling out of the first production run and then suddenly they encounter issues, I very much believe that this could be this year's Denafrips.
Yeah, I don't really review DACs anymore. Otherwise, this is something I would do. Well, I say I don't review DACs anymore. That's not. I tried to swear off them, excuse me, but then I ended up just doing streaming DACs instead. So it's just same horse, different jockey. It's just ridiculous. But it does look extremely interesting, especially for the people who love separates and things like that and who aren't afraid to buy from China. So I think this is probably the business model is a good compromise. It's like a hybrid, isn't it, of between selling direct and selling through a distributor.
Yeah, I believe that, for example, Denafrips right now, or Windchime Audio, as the global distributor, I believe that they are down to 3 major retailers. One in Malaysia, because I heard that on the podcast, on the video yesterday. The second one I forget, but also in Asia somewhere. And the third one is in France. They only have 3.
Oh,
and that is because their profit margin, it's called audiophonics.fr.
Yes, I know Audiophonics, yep.
That's because their project margins are deliberately slim in order to keep the sell price low. And a lot of dealers, if they can make twice or thrice the margin with a different brand, they have to really, really be committed to a Chinese brand where they make a whole lot less money.
So if you're in Europe, you should know that Audiophonics, in my experience, because I bought a bunch of the stuff from them.
Me too.
They ship very quickly. They're very fast out the door, no messing, decent. Yeah, I have no quibbles with them whatsoever. The only thing I will add to this part of the conversation, and I guess because I've mentioned Denafrips already, you mentioned them as well, is that because these are, let's call them new hi-fi brands, right? So they're not established hi-fi brands.
Correct.
So they haven't put in the years of new product supporting old products, new product updates for old products. Like they haven't gone down the years, so they don't have the caliber, the weight of a solid brand like say a Marantz or a Tiac or or a Rega, right? So what that means for the consumer is that yes, they'll get a bargain when they buy it. They really will. But when it comes to resale value, I'm sorry about the emergency vehicles going past. When it comes to resale value, it's not as good as a Marantz, right? Because you'll be lucky to get 50% of your money back. And I don't say that to put people off. I just say that to kind of flesh out the whole picture. So if you love it and you want it, and by all means, absolutely go for it. And I'm sure you'd enjoy it for many years, but I know that many audiophiles have itchy feet after a few years and they want something new. So you have to kind of keep this in mind. But you are effectively saving when you buy because you're not paying a dealer margin. Or if you are, you're paying a very small one and you're not really paying much of a distributor margin, I wouldn't think. So you're closer to factory direct pricing than you would be, because if this thing went out through a traditional distributor dealer network, I would guess, I'm guessing here, it would be 5K.
Yes, easily.
Yeah, so
because in order to be attractive to establishing a substantial dealer network and displace current brands that a dealer already has, you can't just come in there by supposedly being better or the new kid on the block. The dealer also wants to make a profit. And if you're not as or more profitable as the golden cows that this dealer already has and has supported for the last 20 years, you give him no reason to bring you in.
I guess that's also how bigger brands build their images, isn't it? It's not just advertising or online reviews. It's like the presence in dealerships, year in, year out. So, you keep going every year or so and you still see Marantz, Bowers, Kef, Monitor Audio, Yamaha, because their business model is different to this way of selling Chinese gear. So the bang for buck on this stuff, I mean, like on the Denafrips was outstanding, like absolutely superb. But I know, from talking to people, it wasn't me that bought, a big Terminator, but selling a Terminator, it's not easy if you want to try and recoup a lot of your money.
And shipping, that thing is monstrously heavy.
Yes, it's
so you're going to pay.
Well,
but I should also sort of seg back to the beginning and sort of that sci-fi moniker, which took Chinese imports quite a lot of time to overcome. But I think I believe that Windchime Audio have been in business for about 15 years, somewhere between 10 and 15 years. So over the last decade, this first sort of glut of cheap and cheerful and very often sort of tube-based Chinese product has sort of matured. And now we have things like Denafrips and Kinky and Holo Audio in stereophile class A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And that also shows that it sort of has broken into the mainstream and certain brands have garnered acceptance to being completely competitive on all fronts, except maybe for this cachet thing. that when it comes to time to resell, maybe you won't get as much.
Yeah, I mean, having lived in Australia for many years, I know that Australian audiophiles are very open to buying stuff from China. And that's it's not so much of maybe it's not so much of an issue now, but back then, if you wanted to buy something from China in Europe, you're definitely looking at import duties and taxes. Whereas down in Australia, when I lived there, it would just sail on through customs straight to your door, no questions asked. If you bought a Chinese, I remember a bunch of us buying Chinese DACs from Audio GD, because they had a bunch of those PCM 1704 models way back when. There was no issue. So that's probably why it's very important if a company the brand LAiV wants to make inroads in Europe, is you've got to have a European distribution so your customer isn't put off by going, well, how much is DHL going to stump me for at the door? Because I've probably said this before in this podcast. When I get a package from outside of the EU, it arrives at my door, yes, but the DHL dude at the door says you've got to pay $50, $100, whatever it is, to me now in cash, no change. So you've got to have the exact money.
Well, it actually will be more, because on a $2,700 piece at 23% VAT in Ireland, that's nearly a quarter.
Yeah,
that's going to be a lot more than $50.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just giving examples. Yeah. I mean, mainly thinking of like vinyl box sets and things like that to buy. But yes, if you're buying, and the whole sort of undervaluing thing doesn't work. It just, the German customs see right through it because they open it and they look it up on the net, and then you're in the shit, or maybe somebody's in the shit, or they'll send it back. Anyway, so I don't want to overcomplicate this. I think it's very cool that they've got this product that competes with all those bigger boys that you have, Srajan, and also they've got their worldwide distribution plan almost locked down. So they know it sounds like they know what they're doing terms of building a brand and selling it into different territories, especially the USA. Also really important.
Over to you. What's the next news item?
Okay, I've got a question for you then.
All right.
So you don't do Wi-Fi, correct?
Right, because of migraines and feeling that my head is starting to sort of go soft and swimmy.
I know that some people kind of... I understand that people don't understand it, but also this is why you use Audiovana as your main streaming client, is that right?
Well, so being Wi-Fi allergic without wearing a tinfoil hat means that everything has to hardwire, which means that I cannot use a so-called audiophile server streamer that relies on a tablet remote, because tablet remote, we're back to Wi-Fi. Now, how am I going to access the music? So I use Audiovana and my big iMac screen to use browser windows to access Qobuz or Spotify or YouTube or Tidal. So I still have a mouse and I have a keyboard, but they are Bluetooth. Bluetooth for some reason doesn't bother us. It's the Wi-Fi that does. And Audiovana is what improves the sound by bypassing, I believe it's called Core Audio with Apple.
Yep.
Yes, that's why I use that.
Okay. Because a lot of people say to me, oh, John, you know that Roon doesn't sound as good as Audiovana. I'm like, but I love Roon because it's this glorious sort of networking, interconnective thing of things. But Roon isn't the only thing that I use. And in the last, let's say, 4 years, I've got to reach for my phone actually, I have been using some software called Plex.
Right.
Now, home theatre dudes will be all over Plex. They'll know about this. It's mainly used to stream movies, right? But I got into it about 4 years ago when Plex issued an app called Plexamp. I'll hold it up to the camera. I realise that listeners won't be able to see shit, but basically it's a smartphone app, right, that allows me to browse the music stored on my Plex server so it can stream movies and music. But Plexamp is music only. I can't look at the movies and the TV shows on this, it's just music. Now, what's cool about this app is that it will let me stream from my Plex server to this phone app wherever I am in the world. So basically, my locally stored music, it's like a hard drive connected to a MacBook, that is my own private streaming service. So I guess I'm one of these sort of control freak audiophiles. I know lots of people will identify with this. I want a hard copy of everything that I like, whether it's a CD, a record, or a download, because I don't trust streaming services to kind of keep hold of it or manage it properly or have the right version or the right master or the ID3 tags sorted out properly. There's all sorts of like little quirky issues, and you never know when they're going to strike, and when they do, they're irritating. So I do a lot of my out-of-the-house streaming using Plexamp and my Plex server. And what's great about Plexamp, I say it's like your private streaming service, this app even behaves that way because it allows you to offline content. So if I was in a hotel room or I'm at home here, I could download some songs from my Plex server to my phone inside the Plexamp apps cache, and then I could walk it out of the house. And I'm not streaming using my mobile data plan on my phone, right? Now that came out in 2020. So I've been using that on and off for the last, 4 years. And I was actually, when it came out, I was hammering Roon going, you've got to get something like this. And they have subsequently issued something called Roon Arc, which is their app that allows you to stream outside of the house and do offline content, and a lot more actually. Roon Arc is more powerful, but it's a separate app to the remote control app that we'd use in the house to control streams in the house, right? Now that's important because what comes next is that, I've got to look at my notes here, and maybe I'll even share my screen. Maybe I'll share my screen just to see if I can do it and not mess it up, Srajan. Maybe I will. Let me have a look. Let's go with that one there. So I'm going to show a picture of a device, right? And I'll explain it to listeners. What we're looking at here is a photo of the Audiolab 9000N network streamer, or streaming DAC, because there is a DAC inside. This is a streaming DAC. Now, there's nothing really noteworthy about that, but if we go back a bit, that's where I'm trying to get to, right? I want to go back a little bit more again. So in 2021, Plex, the company, released new versions of Plexamp for Android, for iOS, but also for Windows and Mac OS. So you could use those apps on your desktop to control streaming in your house. So you could use them, Srajan, because they're on a wired device, right? But the really interesting thing about that is they also released a version of Plexamp for Linux and one that runs headlessly, so without a GUI. So it runs sort of on the command line inside your Linux install, and you don't need to interface directly with it, on a desktop environment directly on your Linux machine. Now, why that is really, or was really interesting, was that I anticipated a lot of people putting it into Raspberry Pi devices. But the problem is, 2021, 2022 were the years of the great Raspberry Pi shortage. And as far as I could tell, it didn't really go anywhere, because I was expecting Plexamp to exist on a Raspberry Pi. Now, why that's important, and this is really crucial to this part of the story, is that any instance of Plexamp can stream content to another instance of Plexamp using the Plex server as the source of those streams. So I could be playing a file on my phone if I've got a Raspberry Pi running Plexamp in my hi-fi rack connected to my DAC. I can then go, okay, I want to hear that song on my hi-fi rack, send it over to that version of Plexamp over there, and then that takes over the stream from the server. I know this is getting a bit kind of into the weeds, but I want people to understand it. It's just basically like Roon, or like Spotify Connect. I think the best analogy is Spotify Connect. Actually.
It's really all about signal routing.
Yes, it's plumbing. As Livonia calls it, plumbing. It absolutely is. But it's important because prior to this, it wasn't easy to get Plex music streams into a hi-fi system, and generally they weren't gapless. So until Plexamp, they weren't gapless. And that was, you Google gapless and Plex, and you go back to like 2019, you'll see loads of grumbles about when's gapless coming, and it never came. But with Plexamp, it does.
So I would presume that the reason you are featuring this when you're already a Roon user is that there must be something, maybe price, that makes this unusually attractive, if it's sort of a Roon type interface?
Yes. So it's €100 or thereabouts lifetime. But I've got some more on this in a minute, because you might not even need to use that, because initially Plexamp was strictly what's called Plex Pass only. You had to buy a Plex Pass, which was €100 lifetime, right? But then a couple of years ago,
versus
that,
Rune being what?
500, 600, 700. Okay. I mean, it's several $100, right?
All right.
So Plexamp dropped the requirement for having the Plex Pass to use Plexamp a couple of years back. No, it wasn't. It was last year. So you can get some of the basic features. You don't get streaming to a Pi. You don't get that. You don't get some of the AI playlist building and things like that. It's called Sonic Sage, but many sort of old school users won't give a shit about that. So you can try it for yourself. But where I'm trying to get to here is that basically what Audiolab did is the software on their 9000N isn't like what's on the 6000 series of products. It isn't Play-Fi. Thank God it's not Play-Fi. So what Audiolab did is they collaborated with Lumen, the Hong Kong streaming developing company. And Lumen last year put Plexamp as a Linux headless version into their flagship streamer, which is expensive. It's much more expensive than the 9000N. The 9000N sells for £2,500, I believe. Still pricey, but it's not like high-end streaming server type pricing. So a couple of weeks ago, Audiolab rolled out a firmware update for the 9000N that puts Plexamp in the 9000N. So now I can use Plexamp on my phone to send streams from my Plex server to the 9000N. And I don't need Rune to do it. But the great thing about it, I think, the advantage this has over Rune, apart from price, is that it's all in one app. So if I want to offline an album, then walk it out the door, I don't have to switch to a different app. It's all in the same Plexamp app. It gets a bit when you're talking about Plexamp.
Now, an interesting thing I think to throw in here is that a lot of traditional audio manufacturers don't have the in-house engineering wherewithal when it comes to streaming apps at a high level, which explains now why an expert like Lumen was approached to license something that they had sort of managed and insert or embed that in the Audiolab software, because Audiolab may not have been able to do it themselves, correct?
I don't know whether Audiolab, so IAG, who own the brand, have any software development team of any significant size. I would really doubt it. I think there aren't many companies that can do this kind of thing. So you've got Auralic, Lumen,
Orenda, possibly?
Orenda. There was another one that I just thought of. It's gone out. Blue Sound, obviously. I think streaming and sort of building apps, building firmwares that talk to apps, really separates men from boys in the digital audio market. So yeah, I think most companies can bring a DAC to market, no problem. But bringing a streaming DAC or a streamer is a much, much more complicated ball game and a much more expensive ball game.
Unless you end up with UPnP, like really basic.
I swore off UPnP years ago.
Right.
My personal view, this is a personal view, this won't be shared by many people, I don't think, is that I don't think we need to have apps developed in-house by hi-fi companies. They might do it for sound quality reasons, but if you implement a choice, if you've got a choice, so if you do Rune, so for the big pocket people, they can get that. Plex and Plexamp can go for people who aren't flush. You could run this whole Plexamp thing for free. And I did check this actually with Audiolab 2 days ago. I said, look, it says in the Plex Pass details that you only get streaming to a Linux version of Plexamp using that Plex Pass version. Do people need to pay for the Plex Pass to stream to the Audiolab? An Audiolab software team came back to my contact and said no. Interestingly, they said that they worked in collaboration with Plex to make this happen as well. So that is super interesting, right? So Plex might be eyeing the hi-fi space as like, well, they can come in cheaper than Rune with the similar functionality. It's not as elegant in terms of this sort of beautiful book type interface with the sort of hyperlinked content, but it's still way better than any UPnP app. So you get Rune, Plexamp, Spotify Connect, Tidal Connect. I believe Qobuz Connect is on the way. Yeah. A lot of companies now are putting virtual squeeze box clients in their streaming devices, or that's what they started with. Inua started with that. so you could do a squeeze box system. I just don't see the need
for any more, right?
I mean, I know Blue Sound they must pay millions to develop that app. Do they need it? I don't think necessarily they do. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing, so I can't really speak for them. But as the sort of average streaming, and I'm a power user with this stuff, like, what more do you need? As long as you have a choice, and as long as there are free options. If everything was paywalled, I'd be a little bit about it. But you've got AirPlay, Chromecast isn't gapless. If AirPlay 3 comes out, and if it bypasses the whole routing through the phone thing, that would be pretty significant. But I just see the addition of Plex to the home streaming audiophile hi-fi enthusiast space is really super interesting. So yeah, back to you, Srajan.
So the next one is not a new brand, but a new product that will be surprising to most people that are familiar with the brand.
Okay.
And to seg into it, when we're talking widebanders, and when we are talking where they started out, I believe most people would flash first on Louder and AER. And then they might remember Rhythm from India, and maybe in more recent times, Voxative in Berlin, and then Cube Audio in Poland. And on a separate tangent, in the US, we had Zoo Audio.
Yep.
And common to all of those widebanders is sort of this informal agreement, if you will, that the best diameter driver to use, if one driver is supposed to handle, let's say, 40 to 18 or 19 kilohertz, is about 8 to 10 inches across, and you need a wither in the middle, and most likely you need some form of either quarter wave tapered line or backloaded horn in a rather biggish cabinet to get reasonable bandwidth for modern music. So widebanders tended to be, and inject what you want, they tended to be rather sizable in terms of the driver required.
Yeah, I want to ask a question about this. So like a larger widebander, does it have better capabilities in the low end, but the trade-off is that it doesn't go as high, which is why you need the whizzer?
Absolutely.
But then you can get these sort of smaller, sort of 3, 4, 5 inch wideband drivers that I would imagine aren't very effective in the low end,
Correct.
but might be better in the uppermost frequencies. Is that right?
Yes. And so it's really a matter of trade-off and balance. Do you get the driver that sort of prioritizes space, reach, and power and extension? And the moment you overload that aspect, you take away from the treble how far it goes and how refined it is. Vice versa, you get a smaller driver, you expect better resolution in the midband and the presence regions, and definitely better treble, but it'll crap out sooner in the bass, unless then you have some enormous backloaded horn, maybe a spiral. There was a Greek company that made one. It was 2 meters and 40 tall. A small driver, a very, very big cabinet, opening in a horn mouth that you could basically walk into. They'll do it too, but try to sell that.
That was my first exposure. Those kinds of sort of big cabinets, small drivers was my first exposure to widebander designs and implementations.
In your city of Berlin, there is a Ukrainian transplant by the name of Ole Litzohub with a company called Kamerton Audio. And Kamerton is the Ukrainian word for, I believe, tuning fork. And that's the logo of his company. He has, and I reviewed it, a small widebander that he makes himself, I mean the driver, in a small rear-ported monitor enclosure that sells for at least 12,000 euros a pair.
Okay.
And it has, of course, piano gloss finish, so it looks the part. That was the first time that I reviewed a widebander that small that actually could make about 35 hertz without an add-on tweeter. Absolutely shocking performance, but you had to pay. Now, I'm going to try the screen sharing again.
I'm just looking at where they are in Berlin, actually, now you mention this. It's over in the sort of southeast area, past Treptower Park. Okay. Okay. It must be near Ostbahnhof. Or Rummersberg. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's in the east. Sorry. I just wanted to know.
No trouble. And now, why are widebanders in general interesting? You and I have a lot of experience with Zoo. I personally have a lot of experience with Voxative and Cube as well, is that they don't have a crossover. So basically, our amplifier outputs going through a few meters of speaker cables go directly to the voice call of this driver, and this driver covering the whole frequency band, or as much as it possibly can, is now reproduced by a point source.
Okay.
And taking out those reactive crossover parts avoids time smear with capacitors that absorb energy and release it later, and it removes a lot of the reactivity between driver and amplifier. The flip side is that now the manufacturer, the designer, doesn't have baffle width filters, notch filters, impedance linearization filters to sort of smooth out the frequency response. The only thing he has is he has a driver and he has a cabinet, and the way those two work together, for better or worse, linearizes the frequency response as much as he can.
So you get better time domain performance than you get frequency domain performance.
Exactly. So the widebanders tend to excel at time domain performance, and that also very often means excellent depth specificity in the sound stage, and you get a lot of sort of snap and prat, like pace, rhythm, and timing, but the frequency response may be a little ragged. Okay, so now we're going to the brand I want to talk about. Lindemann Audio, out of Germany, in Bavaria. They celebrated their 30th anniversary last year. And last year at the Warsaw show, which I believe takes place in November, they introduced this small monitor speaker. So for those people that are only listening, we're talking about a monitor speaker just big enough to contain a 5-inch, what you would think looks like a midwoofer, and then above it in an oval waveguide, and the oval is sideways, so it's wider than it's tall, a very, very small air motion transformer tweeter. And you look at it and you think, okay, two-way. No, it's not. The widebander is from a Chinese company called Darko.Audio, and it's the Alpair 5.3, the third generation of the 5-inch version. That driver does 40 hertz to 9 kilohertz, all on one voice coil. And in order to fill out the 9 kilohertz to beyond 20 kilohertz range is that little AMT tweeter, and that sits on a first order high pass. So there's a single capacitor just on that tweeter. What looks like a midwoofer but is really a widebander has no crossover components whatsoever. It is rear ported, which is why this small enclosure is supposed to do about 40 hertz in room, and it sells for $3,200 a pair, which in the widebander realm, being this small and this sort of bandwidth extended, is actually a very reasonable price. And the only thing that you and I have heard that was cheaper, but rather bigger, was the Zoo Dirty Weekend X, the DWX. Which I believe started around maybe $1,500 in the base configuration and fully duded out, maybe not quite 3. But it was a lot bigger because that driver is 10.3 inches across. So it obviously needs more width.
Yeah, but can I raise, we just mentioned the DWX. I think the biggest stumbling block with DWX, and I can see this is probably not the case with the Lindemann from the picture you're showing, I'll come back to why in a moment, but the biggest stumbling block with the DWX is finding stands.
Right.
Because I was very fortunate that a patron of mine custom made me a pair, and they're fantastic. But not everybody has that kind of fortune or that kind of, well, I could call it luck if you like. So I think Sean Casey, if he can, would be advised, if he wants to keep running that speaker model, is to find somebody who would make a speaker stand for him that's a bespoke fit, because it's kind of hard, because it's the wider, bigger base, right? Now, looking at the photo that you've put up of these Lindemann speakers, I can already see some kind of bespoke stand in play. Is that what we're seeing here?
Yes, that is the stand that retails for $295 a pair. It is a deliberately low mass stand, and it creates a deliberate, very minor rake of the speaker. So the speaker is firing up very, very slightly. So it's 3200 a pair for the speaker, with a thin, sort of grayish aluminum baffle, and then an off-white HGF cabinet with a rear port and a single pair of only banana binding posts, and a $295 matching gray lightweight stand. And in between, we see what Lindemann calls the music book. They have two electronics in a half-width enclosure. One is called the Source 2, and one is called the Combo. Now, the next picture I'm going to show is that Lindemann in Germany 30 years ago started to make a name for themselves with an absolutely massive, completely overbuilt, very expensive SACD player. That was at a time when Sony sort of ruled that market segment. They introduced the format, and they had these battleship tank-like, very expensive, very good transports or players. And Lindemann, already 10 years ago, on the right-hand side, had a monitor speaker using super expensive Accutone drivers. And 20 years prior, they had a floor-standing speaker. So Lindemann and loudspeakers are not a new thing, but we just haven't seen speakers from them in a long while. The next image just shows the speaker from the front, it shows it from the rear, and the grill attaches magnetically. Then the next image is a picture of the widebander. It exists in two versions with a sort of copper tone, anodized finish and a silver finish. Lindemann picked the sort of noisier, louder, brassier copper tone finish.
I like that. It looks good.
And now here's the thing that makes this driver very unique. It does not have a spider.
Oh, okay.
A spider in a dynamic driver is the part that we don't see, which is usually a circular cloth impregnated and corrugated that centers the voice coil, and it gives the driver the restorative force. When the driver excurses and it goes out, it helps it to come back. But by the same token, the spider is absorbing a lot of the energy that the amplifier is trying to send to the voice coil. It's a lossy part, and a lot of smart dynamic driver designers have now wondered, well, can we get rid of it? And it seems to be very difficult by the time we're talking about a bass driver, because the bass driver will have a lot of excursion, and trying to keep the voice coil centered while this thing is moving and not having a spider seems to be very difficult. The only manufacturers that I know that have managed Audiophysic in Germany, and they have the driver manufacturer Monacore make drivers for them without a spider. And in the super expensive top Audiophysic model, all the drivers, top to bottom, are spiderless.
I'm going to have to interrupt here for a moment. Just a bit of Berlin culture, right? Nothing to do with what you just said, Srajan. I'm so sorry. But you can probably hear it coming into my audio. So Berliners, they love a good demonstration. And one of the favoured routes is Friedrichstrasse, and I live one street behind. And I can hear a demo coming down Friedrichstrasse right now. And so if you hear lots of shouting, music, know that that's what's going on, and it's reaching my microphone feed. I would shut the window, but then there's a risk of my webcam overheating. So swings and roundabouts. So you're going to have to live with the Berlin colour. Sorry to interrupt, Srajan, because it was interesting about the not being a spider on the driver. Okay, so back to you.
So I covered that the only ones that I know of that have already done that prior are Audiophysic. There's a very, very niche French manufacturer called Fertin, I believe he pronounces himself. And finally, there's two brothers out of Belgium. They're the Newt brothers, and they have a brand called Illumnia. And their driver does away not only with the spider, but also with the surround.
Okay.
So back to the images that I'm showing. Now I'm showing the music book from the back. And we see that the source has XLR and RCA outputs. And if we replace the source with the combo, we're losing the XLR outputs, and I believe we may even be losing one of the audio inputs, but we're gaining speaker outputs, because now we have 75 watt per channel Class D N-Core power modules in there. And the reason why I'm mentioning the music book is because of this next image. Because so far we've been talking about the monitor, which is a passive speaker called the Move. And just very recently at a dealer event in Germany, Lindemann introduced a bass extender to go with it, which is called the Groove.
Okay.
And the Groove is basically a bass bin, which underneath the monitor makes the monitor stand exactly as tall as it would on its own stand. It doesn't get any bigger. The Groove contains an 8-inch active woofer and an 8-inch passive radiator, and it contains a stereo amplifier that puts out 400 watt peak to the woofer and 60 watts to the monitor. Because if we dock the monitor atop the Groove, we turn this whole contraption into a fully active speaker.
Hold that thought. I've got to shut the window. This is going to get deafening. Hang
By
on.
all means.
It's an especially loud demo. I wasn't anticipating that. I don't know what they're complaining about, but it's going to be something worthwhile, I'm sure. Sorry.
No problem.
It's just, I'd completely forgotten that this happens on a Saturday.
Ah.
Almost every Saturday, and I always forget every week. Anyway, sorry, yes. So now you've got like an active bass bin underneath your passive loudspeaker.
Right. And there is an active high pass on the first order at 100 hertz that now goes to the monitor speaker. The interesting thing is now the speaker by itself, passively, is good to about 40 hertz, we are told. If we are now putting a 100 hertz high pass in front of it in the active domain, we are relieving the speaker of 20 to 100 hertz signal that it doesn't even see.
Right.
And that liberates the driver from heating up because it's trying to do something it cannot. It restricts the need for it to excurse. It basically eliminates about 80% of excursion and related distortion. It makes the whole thing sound better. And interestingly enough, all of that happens without any DSP. This is purely analog. Now, the pictures I'm showing are from the dealer event. They are not on the website yet. I'm supposed to get the whole kit and caboodle. I'm told maybe 2 weeks because the supplier of the bass bin is a little bit delayed. They do not have final pricing yet. Most likely they don't have the bill of materials yet. So I don't know what it will cost. But the idea is that as a two-step approach, start with the monitors, add the bass bin when you have the money, and then run either the Source 2 or the combo music book. You have a complete system. Now the music book, the Source 2, is a preamp. It is a streamer. It can optionally include a CD transport. It's an MC phono stage, and it is a headphone amplifier. So really, you do not need anything else but signals from somewhere. It could be a smartphone, it could be Bluetooth, it could be wireless, a small half-width box in silver, and a pair of off-white looking speakers. I would expect that if you buy the whole thing, you'll come in for less than 10,000 euros. Not cheap, but for somebody like Lindemann, who has started in the high-end audio space with expensive, very well-regarded products, after 30 years of experience, flowing into this latest venture, I expect this to perform way above its station. And once I review it, I'll find out whether I'm right.
Okay. It looks interesting. It really does. You don't have to, I mean, if you wanted to, if you run the active bass bin underneath the speaker, then you obviously only need a streaming DAC, and with the preamp functionality, you don't need the streaming amplifier speaker thing.
No.
So does that mean you could use any streaming DAC? So you could use the Audiolab I've just spoken about if you want to do Plex, if that's your thing.
As long as you have volume control.
As long as you've got volume control, does it have to be XLR outs, or can it be RCA outs?
That I don't know yet. I assume it's going to be both, because the music book Source 2 has XLR and RCA outputs.
Yeah.
And Lindemann, Norbert, that's his name, Norbert Lindemann, the designer, he's very much into balanced circuitry. So I would be surprised if this baseband didn't have XLR inputs. But at the moment, I don't know.
Okay. All right.
Back to you.
I want you to imagine that I want to send you on vacation, right?
Oh,
to a
make it Fiji.
Okay, let's pick Fiji. Beautiful location, right?
All right.
Absolutely stunning. Great weather, great food, great hospitality, amazing beaches. Like it's a dream destination for many people. So that's locked in. That's unassailable, right? You're definitely going to this beautiful place. But there is a catch. Well, there are two catches. The first catch is that your money is only good in 1 in every, let's say, 10,000 establishments.
Okay.
In Fiji, that's not going to be many, but if it was a different tropical location, there might be many more. But you can only spend your money in 1 in every 10,000 establishments.
All right.
The second catch is that we have to send you on a special plane. It doesn't have 2 wings. It has 10 wings or more, which is going to cost you a lot more money to get there, right? So amazing location, but your choice of restaurants and shops is going to be much narrower than you're used to where you live, right? And the outward and return journey, much more expensive in a much more sort of advanced hardware configured plane, right?
I ain't going.
Okay, you're not going.
Sorry.
I can't necessarily say that I would blame you. So what I've just described there really is the proposal for music fans of Dolby Atmos, right?
All right.
Is that we've got a limited library and we need to have, let's just call it more advanced hardware, more of it, and it's going to be more expensive. Now, I've made a video about this. I don't want to sort of double down on those concerns that I have now, but I'm just trying to sort of paint the picture. So maybe the alternative is that rather than bring Dolby Atmos to your house because you've got to put speakers in the ceiling, because interesting, I did follow up on, I said I wouldn't talk about it, but I did look at Dolby's website and they have an Atmos installation document. It does date back to 2019, but it says that the height component is fundamental to the Dolby Atmos experience. So all this talk elsewhere on this website of 2.1 being Atmos, even though it will collapse down, or 4.1 being Atmos, even though it will collapse down, anything without a height aspect, I don't think is really Atmos, but that's a side issue here. So let's say you can't or don't want to put 10 speakers in your house all around your lounge room, but what if, instead of it coming to you, you could go to it? Now that is the proposition. I'm going to try and smoothly share my screen without stuffing up, of something that is going to happen in Munich this year at the Munich High-End Audio Show. Now, here is a gentleman. I'm showing a photo right now. This guy in the middle of this photo, for the benefit of listeners, is a guy called Stephen Wilson. Stephen Wilson is the founder of a band called Porcupine Tree. He's also in No Man with a chap called Tim Bowness, with whom he also makes an amazing podcast about classic albums. And not just classic albums, interesting albums, more left field choices than, say, Q Magazine as it was, or Mojo, or Uncut if you're in the UK, or Rolling Stone if you're in the USA. And Stephen Wilson is also the go-to guy. The guy if you want a Dolby Atmos mix of your album. He's the guy. So a lot of very interesting, and again, left field choices have been done by Wilson, and including some mainstream choices. I think he was speaking recently on his podcast about how he'd done a Guns N' Roses album, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a mainstream choice from years ago, but that it's not going to see the light of day because they've changed their mind about how they see Atmos for whatever reason. But that's by the by. So Stephen Wilson was the ambassador for the Munich High-End Show in 2019. He's not going to be the ambassador this year, but they've invited him back to conduct an Atmos demo. Now, this isn't just like any Atmos demo. He's teamed up with PMC. So PMC are going to turn up, and I've got to scroll down here to make sure I get my notes correctly, right? I'm going to highlight it for the benefit of viewers, but for the listeners, 17 loudspeakers, 4 subwoofers.
Unholy
17
crap.
loudspeakers, right?
Wow.
4 subs. That's a lot of speakers, right?
That is.
And they're going to kit out the whole room, so there's going to be this spatial, immersive, these are 2 words that come up a lot, spatial and immersive, audio experience. And what Wilson is going to do is that 2 or 3 times a day he's going to conduct demonstrations of his album mixed in Atmos, and some of the work he's done, some of the sort of Dolby Atmos remix work he's done for the likes of Tears for Fears, Ultravox, Roxy Music. I think he's done some XTC. He's done a whole bunch of them, right? Mm-hmm. So he's going to be doing a sort of show and tell demo, which is my favourite kind. I like somebody talking me through what I'm about to hear. You guys should listen for this, right? Or tell us afterwards what you thought about the low end. I love that kind of thing because there's more of a conversation going on.
Especially if this is the golden boy on the very, very top of the heap.
Right. Yeah, but so he's doing morning and afternoons and then an extra one on Friday and Saturday. But I think what's really interesting here is that, and I know that when I first went to Munich, my first year, you said to me, John, look, even if you don't like the pricing or the looks or even the music of what's being played in many of these rooms, here's an opportunity for you to get a taste of what's possible sound-wise, right? I say subsequently I've learned that the room is a much more limiting factor than that the idea would suggest, but it's still a noble idea, and I think many people, especially music-based audiophiles, we're not talking about home theatre people. Home theatre people are a different breed, and I guess they've already put all the speaker array in their lounge room for movies and music primarily, and then the Atmos music is just icing on the cake for them.
Right.
But would you agree, most demonstration rooms in Munich are stereo. 99.9% are stereo, right?
Yeah.
So this year there's going to be a big Atmos demonstration conducted as a collaboration between Stephen Wilson and PMC. I think it's going to be interesting because this is it's a rare opportunity to hear that many speakers play that many albums. The reason I in my analogy, I said that you would only be able to spend your money, Srajan, in Fiji at 1 in 10,000 locations, is that, well, if you go out onto Apple Music, which is generally the biggest provider of Atmos, 1 in every 100,000 tracks is available in Atmos. It's pretty low. Mm. It's only like a single % of the library so far. But I don't want to get too distracted by that. But yesterday, I've got to find my notes here because I did speak to a dealer in the UK.
Okay.
And he was suggested to me by the guys at Golden Ear, who said, look, if you're digging into Atmos, John, you need to talk to this dealer. Now, I'm not going to name him because he said some things that I don't want to get him in trouble with his employer. But basically, he definitely agreed that there must be a height component to Dolby Atmos. So there must be speakers in the ceiling. And allied to that, he agreed with my assertion that upward-firing speakers, well, he didn't say they were shit, but he said, look, if we get a client come in, we will do all that we can to talk them out of doing the ceiling bounce, and we'll try and talk them into putting speakers in the ceiling for the sort of proper experience. And I did ask him how much it would cost to have all this stuff installed. I said, typical Dolby Atmos array, what's your installation costs? And he said, well, it's a 2-day job, most cases, and that's roughly between 12 and 1,700 euros. He told me in pounds, but I've just converted it a little bit.
Okay, let me backtrack. So now we're not talking about any of the hardware. We're just talking about installing, hiding, and running the necessary wiring to then attach the speakers and amplifiers, etc.
Yeah, I asked him actually some of the most popular brands. He said Bowers & Wilkins speakers were probably the most in demand, then Kef, then maybe Monitor Audio.
Well, it's a UK dealer, so obviously.
Yeah, a UK dealer, yes. But yeah, this is just the installation cost, right?
Yeah.
And he did say in most cases you can route the wires, the speaker cables, through the ceiling cavity and the wall cavity, And I explained to him that like I live in a concrete block and that's never going to happen here. I mean, I've got like a 2-foot concrete wall.
Yeah, I can see that with the mechanical drills trying to get holes in your concrete.
I do. I have to use what's it called? So it's like a hammer drill.
Yeah, a hammer drill.
You can't use a normal drill
No.
in these. Anyway, whatever. He also told me something really super interesting.
Okay.
He said that 99.9% of all Atmos installs that his clients pay his company to do, they are all for home theatre, so all for movies and music. He said he's never, maybe he said once, somebody came in and said, like, I want a Dolby Atmos system just for music, or for music primarily. He said it's all driven by the home theatre experience, which I can totally understand.
Now, can I ask, if you found out, did he tell you whether most people went full hog? Or are they like different level and the most popular is like a 7.2 point whatever? Or
Well, I think, so 7 is the number of speakers at ear level. The next point is the number of subwoofers. The third point is how many speakers you've got in the ceiling, or how many,
right.
or phantom speakers. He said like 7.1.4 or 7.1.2 was pretty typical.
All right.
I mean, as I mentioned before, Dolby on their website have diagrams for 2.1, 5.1, 7.1, because this is the beauty of Atmos, is that the signal will collapse according to the number of speakers that you have. So the AV receiver and the Atmos decoder will know what speakers it's talking to and just reroute the sound. So a sound that was originally destined to go to a ceiling speaker can be routed to one of the side or the rear channel, or the rear channels in a 5.1 or a 7.1 configuration. That's what makes it different to the 5.1 and the 7.1, the sort of channel-based systems of 20 years ago, right? When 5.1 and 7.1 were really, really super popular. As I don't know whether you know this, but like one of the key selling points of Atmos is the height of sound.
Mm-hmm.
So a mix engineer like Stephen Wilson can place sound anywhere in 3D space as long as there are ceiling speakers, right? Which is probably why Dolby put it in their installation guide, like you need to have ceiling speakers, but it's also doubly baffling as to why they would say, oh, here's a 2.1 Atmos system, or here's a 5.1. Maybe it's because they realise that, it's kind of a big ask putting speakers in your ceiling, right?
Yeah, but I mean, if the whole idea is 3D sound, in order to map where you want to place the sound, you need to have coordinates. So you need to have things on top, in the bottom, front and rear, and now you can describe on whatever axis you want where exactly the sound is supposed to go. So without ceiling speakers, you cannot have a true 3D experience with the height component. Makes sense.
I agree, but I had a whole bunch of commenters underneath my last video about this saying, well, I've got a 5.1 system and it's Atmos. And I'm like, is it though? Because it doesn't have the height component, which is why I asked this dealer, like, is the height component important? He's like, absolutely it is. Like, it's not Atmos without the height component. Dolby say this.
I have an idea for you, John. When you go to Munich and you go into this demo, see whether the presenter, which might be Mr. Steve Wilson, whether he can defeat the ceiling speakers and have that information collapse into the front channels and see whether you notice the difference. Like, what do these height channels actually do by comparison to not having them?
I don't know how easy that would be to do in a live demo, because obviously that involves some fairly hairy system reconfiguration, I would think. And I don't know whether you can program it into a remote button, so you go, like ceiling speakers on, ceiling speakers off with the... I don't know.
Email him before you go and say, is that possible? And if so, could you do it?
I might ask PMC, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. I'm meant to be talking to Stephen Wilson on camera about all of this, but the date hasn't been locked in yet. And maybe maybe he saw my last video and was like, I'm not talking to John about Atmos anymore. I don't know. But, I just find the whole thing absolutely fascinating. There's one more point that I wanted to bring up, my last point about this. I did ask this dealer rep, I said, look, if I buy a 5K stereo amp and put it next to a 5K Atmos capable AV receiver, but I'm only playing stereo content through both, which one will sound better? And he said, like 9 times out of 10, your stereo amp will sound way better than your AV receiver, which it makes sense because the hardware inside the AV receiver, it has to take care of maybe 11, 15 channels, something like that, and your stereo amp only has to do 2. So you can spend more money on your bill of materials per channel, right? Mm-hmm. But it was interesting to hear that because he'd obviously compared the two. I haven't done that. I've had lots of my viewers suggest that I do it, but in some ways, like almost with a foregone conclusion, it just seems a bit of a ridiculous exercise because I'll get a whole bunch of commenters saying, well, of course the stereo amp sounds better. You're an idiot for doing this. And then you'll get a whole bunch of other people who'll be hugely butthurt that I've criticised the stereo performance of their AV receiver. So they'll be pissed off as well. So it's just like, intuitively it makes sense that a stereo amplifier is going to be better than a multi-channel amplifier just doing stereo. But obviously, if you've only got 2.1 connected to the AV receiver, the Atmos decoder will collapse it down, hopefully nicely. I don't know whether it gives you the same result as when you play the stereo file. That would be interesting to know from a very nerdy technical point of view. But to bring this full circle, I think this demo in Munich with Wilson and PMC is going to be packed all weekend long because the Atmos experience outside of a movie theatre it's pretty rare in the hi-fi world. I mean, I know there's a whole home theatre community. There's AV forums, and all these dudes are really into home theatre. But people who just have good audio gear just for their music, and they route their TV through it, but it's not like the be-all and end-all, just as it is for me. Like I route my TV through my hi-fi system, but I'm not super nerdy about it. But with the music, I am, right? So I don't know. I'm intrigued by what a lot of other people will make of this demo, and I guess I'll finish this segment on this. Right? Is that let's say that Stephen, as happened to me when I went to hear Atmos here, actually some Stephen Wilson mixes. I was like, wow, this is amazing, right? So I'm going to be very clear about this. I'm not disputing the technical performance of an Atmos mix. It sounds fantastic, right? Really. It's not too distracting with sounds behind you and above you. Not in most cases, anyway, as far as I can tell. But if you're attending this demo, I'm sure you're going to go through this maybe 3-step mental series of questions. You'll be like, wow, that sounds amazing. And then your next mental question will be, okay, how do I get this at home? And then your next question will be, okay, now I've got it at home, what albums can I play? So I'll leave it at that, So how do I get this at home? And then what albums can I play? It's back to our holiday to Fiji, I think, Srajan, with that.
But I would now interject that if I was attending Munich this year, which I'm not, I would definitely go to this demo for the same reason that you quoted me on before. I would like to find out what's possible, even though personally I have zero interest in surround sound, even for movies, and surround sound or super immersive spatial audio for music, for stereo. But that wouldn't prevent me from, if I had the opportunity right at my doorstep, being in Munich, I would definitely attend the demo and see what...
I agree. I think you'd be crazy not to go. I think this thing will be... I think it will be the busiest room the entire weekend because people don't have access to this stuff at home. I know they don't have access to all the crazy expensive stuff, but I think this has more of a wow factor. Like 17 speakers, 4 subwoofers. I mean, it's also a bit ridiculous, but...
But talk about ridiculous. You haven't commented on my new headset.
Well, I was going to ask, what headphones are you wearing? But I thought, oh no, I won't interject because I've already derailed us with our demo.
These are the new RAL 1995 Magna, the dual ribbon headphones. So I don't know whether you can see that because the moment I turn, I don't see the camera, but... there's 2 ribbons in there.
I got to say, they look far more normal than previous efforts.
They are.
More normaler. They look good.
Right now, I'm actually running it through tubes, and then I'm upsampling our stream to 1024 DSD. So I must say, John, your voice today sounds particularly swell.
So you've also gone large on the catnip there.
Yeah, very.
Okay, so now we have one more item, Srajan, from you, right?
The final bit of business. Let's see. How am I going to seg into this one? Yes. I'm going to throw a name out to you. I believe I have to say Professor and Doctor. So Professor Dr. Malcolm Hawksford of the Essex University. Does it ring a bell?
John Franks was talking about him a few years ago in Munich, Professor Hawksford. And I've seen John Atkinson refer to Professor Hawksford's work in a I think in the comment section beneath a review.
So he's
his name
a
is
researcher of apparently audio engineering, signal processing, and electromagnetics. And he has published a number of research papers. One of them on the benefits of current mode amplification and where that is actually optimal. In audio, I'm aware of only BMC and then Krell with their cast mode that were using current mode transmission between different components. Rather than voltage mode, they use current mode because current mode transmission disregards the cable's electrical parameters altogether. I also know of a brand called Quest Style who used current mode amplification, and then of course Bakun and Enlium were very big on current mode amplification, but their outputs are still voltage based because the average loudspeaker, a multi-way with a crossover, expects very, very low output impedance and a voltage mode signal.
Okay.
However, if you have a single driver speaker or a headphone where you have one driver doing it all and you have no crossover, now current mode can become advantageous. And Enlium at 3,000 euros or dollars has a portable headphone amplifier that has both current mode and voltage mode outputs, so you can compare the two, which I did. And I preferred current mode by quite a margin. I just have not known about another headphone amplifier that offers that until now. And now let me try to do the sharing thing again. So, Austin Audio Works, obviously a company from Texas, and their mascot up there in the logo up there is a roadrunner wearing a pair of headphones.
Okay.
This company was going to make a splash at the Expono show that just ended. And then apparently a family emergency for health reasons, what have you, prevented their attendance. It's a new brand. They only have 2 models currently. They have a phono stage called the Black Swan that sells for $16.49. And they have what I'm showing, the Black Amp, which is a headphone amp that sells for $18.49.
Can we please note the inclusion of another piece of audiophile catnip here, Srajan? Do you know what that is?
VU meters.
VU meters on this device.
Yes.
Yep.
So for those that are only listening, we're looking at what I assume, I haven't seen this thing in live yet, I assume this also must be a half-width enclosure, but it is a very, very utilitarian black box that has old-style knobs on the front and 2 VU meters, and then the expected headphone outputs on 3.5mm, 6.3, and then 4-pin XLR.
Right.
Now, what's unique about this is that, like Bakun and Enlium, it's using current mode amplification with current mode outputs, and then it adds to the recipe more catnip. Wait for it. Meow. Class A.
Okay. Yeah.
No
Audiophiles love that.
No feedback.
Wow. This is
And fully balanced.
Okay.
The gentleman that makes this amplifier, let's see what I can pull this up here, is called Barry Thornton. And apparently he has come in and out of retirement a few times already. He's worked for a couple of notable audio companies, including Adcom. There's more on the website. And this is his latest venture. Again, already retired, came back out. It's not very expensive. It's not flashily built. But he has apparently rethought his approach to audio, concluded that current mode operation is the cat's meow. He has already designed a complete system, including a phonostage, a preamp, and a power amplifier, all based on this concept. So presumably those models will still be coming. Right now he has a phonostage and this headphone amplifier. It's a US-based company that currently only sell in the US. I asked, if we look at that picture, we see a 4 or 5 pin umbilical DC input. So we know there's an outboard power supply.
Yes.
I do not know whether that is switch mode or linear. I did get word that they already have CE approved 230 and 240 volt versions in-house.
Yeah.
They still have to look into freight, into VAT issues, etc., before they can even think of shipping outside America. And apparently, word of mouth was so positive that their entire first production run on the headphone amplifier is gone. And they're trying to catch up as quickly as possible. I'm trying to get one to review. I may not be able to because I live in Europe. But if anybody was curious about current mode amplification for headphones and couldn't stomach the $3,000 that Enlium is charging for a battery-powered portable, now for basically half the money, $18.95, so now about half, there is a new version that is going to be stationary and I would assume has even more power because it's going to be plugging into the wall.
And it also looks like it's fairly desktop friendly because it's not only is it half width, it looks like it's half depth as well, or 1/3 depth. It's not deep at all.
So
is that right? Yeah.
So that's what I got on my third item, which is a second brand new brand that I didn't hear about. I have a feeling that Michael is probably also going to review that phonostage because he won't have any issues getting his hands on it and it'll be right up his alley.
Absolutely. I think he's already written a news item about it on his website, so on Twittering Machines. So yeah, cool. Well, I think that brings us to a close for Srajan. I'm sort of darting between two windows here.
Well, I have, in the interest of capitalist self-propaganda, I won't be attending Munich this year, but I'll have a brand new CI, a confidential informant, and my boots on the ground will be Italian. So I presume they'll be very stylish. So if you're a manufacturer watching or listening to this, and you have a very handsome gentleman from Italy approach you on behalf of 6 Moons, give him the keys to your kingdom, and I promise we'll take good care of him.
Actually, while I think about what we're talking about Munich, again, in terms of talking to manufacturers through this window here, and I've already said this to Wim, because Wim released... or Weem, I don't know how you say it, they make this affordable streaming products. Yesterday they unveiled a tease of their new streaming DAC. It has a touch screen on the front. Is it called the Ultra? I can't remember. But I told them, I said, look, if you're announcing this before Munich, you need to let me know before Munich because I'm not going to do any show coverage and I'm not going to be reporting on it afterwards. I mean, maybe in this next podcast with Jan, I might talk about a couple of key findings. But I don't do show coverage anymore. So if you're announcing something at Munich and you want you or I to write about it on our websites, we need the info, I would say at least 5 or 6 days before Munich because I'm leaving the weekend before. So if you're the kind of manufacturer who insists on pulling off the covers at the show, I'm not the guy for you because...
Neither am I.
I'm not doing that anymore. This is just an old school way of doing things. Because it robs visitors of key information before they leave, before they leave the house. I think people going to Munich nowadays, in the age of the internet, should have a short list of things they want to see that they prepared in the weeks preceding the show.
Correct.
And then that way they don't run the risk of leaving and going, oh shit, I never saw that Dali speaker that was announced because I had no idea about it because they didn't launch it until Thursday morning at the show, right?
That's been a very, very long pet peeve of mine, and which is why I gave up on even doing show reports. It's like, if you can't bother sending me an email or a web link 2 or 3 weeks prior to the show, and you expect me to be there at 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning, way over on the left in the hall to see you unveil, and then a half an hour later I'm supposed to be on the other side with some other guy doing an unveil, it's like, sorry, I'm not doing it.
But it's not even that, Srajan. I don't even look at it from a...
Well, that's personally for me, yes.
Yeah, from a personal point of view. I look at it from your average punter's point
absolutely.
of view, right? They need to know what's being shown really several days before the show starts.
So you can plan.
And if you're the manufacturer who's going ta-da at the show, I think you're selling them short. And
now, what a lot of viewers and listeners may not know is just how big the Munich show is. I mean, if you wanted to see everything there is to see and stop for 5 minutes, you couldn't see it all. Maybe you have 1 minute to see it all. That means you have to select, you have to cherry pick. And most people get the show report, the show guide, and they will actually mark on the things that they want to see to find out where they are and figure out like a plan of how to navigate that big convention center to be able to see everything in the sort of shortest possible way so they don't zigzag back and forth. Plus, there's the second hotel with an outboard show that we won't promote because they're sort of like a cuckoo's egg, but it's there as well in the Marriott Hotel. So if you want to see that as well, my God, now you even have to cherry pick more.
I think there might even be a third this year.
There might
be wrong, but now that I know that WIM product is being announced, I know to look out for it, because I might have missed it because I don't think they're going to have their own room. They're maybe going to have a booth downstairs, and it's easy to walk right past, like a manufacturer that you might think is big in your world. In Munich, they might have a tiny sort of standing booth downstairs. Nothing wrong with that, but that's just how it goes sometimes, you know. So, yeah, being notified in advance, I think, is the future, for not just for us, but for the audience at large. And I think letting go of these sort of old ways of doing things is something that I want to promote. You know, I want to talk about the manufacturers who are pre-announcing and not insisting on the old school way of pulling off the covers at the show. It just feels so like 1978 to me. I'm sorry, it does. But anyway, on that note, Srajan, we'll sign off. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
I'll chat to you in a few weeks.
All right, cheers.
This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest, makers of the mythical series Analog Interconnects. Click the link in the show notes for more information.